Australis monthly webcasts. I'm broadcasting tonight from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, as well as anyone who may be tuned in today or to the recorded broadcast of tonight's webcast. I'd also like to recognise that we benefit from the knowledge and insights of First Nations people here in Australia and also around the world, including their long relationship with the plants and fungi we revere. This content tonight is for education, conservation and harm reduction purposes. EGA does not condone illegal or ecologically unsustainable behaviour, and this is part of the overall harm reduction ethos. There is no documented evidence of psychedelic use by First Nations Australians. However, a variety of acacia trees are used by First Nations Australians for ethnobotanical purposes. The relationship between First Nations Australians, plants and country is ongoing and should be respected. If you consume acacia, we encourage you to grow acacia too. We recommend that people avoid the harvest of wild plants where possible. Where there are both common and rare acacia, common plants may become rare if harvested unsustainably. Basically, look after the environment that you're in, and that should apply at all times, but especially when you're out on country and when you're exploring the plants and the ecology around you. My name is Nick Wallis. I am the co-founder of the Australian Psychedelic Society and currently head up the Melbourne chapter. EGA provide opportunities for critical thinking and knowledge sharing at the meeting between plants, fungi, mind and culture. EGA embrace the psychedelic in the broadest sense of the word, the science, culture, policy, and in nurturing the grassroots community that hold all of us together. We will again be hosting monthly webcasts every month leading up to this December's in-person Garden States event. If you're interested in this year's event, you'll be able to register your interest at the website now. And I'll just bring that screen up so you can have a look at what it looks like. Here is the registration screen. So you can register your interest there and you will be able to stay in touch with what's going on with the event that way. So yes, you'll find out, of course, when tickets are on sale. If you are a current ticket holder, of course, those tickets will be valid for this year's event. Remember as well that we are live tonight, very live. So please drop your questions in the comments section of the YouTube chat. I'll be keeping my eye on them and bringing those to our presenter at the end of his presentation. Do hit subscribe to the EGA channel if you haven't already. We're nearly at the 8,000 subscriber mark, and we would really like to hit that soon. And by the end of the year, we're aiming for 10,000 subscribers, which will put us among the top ethnobotanical and psychedelic YouTube channels in the world. So help us reach that mark. Share this video with your friends when it's available. Share EGA's work with your friends as well. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to keep up to date with the ethnobotanical and broader psychedelic conversation. You can also get your hands on a special EGA t-shirt at iswoz.com.au. That's izwoz.com.au. I have one. It's out of reach right now. It's very nice. They are very beautifully designed and it's beautiful material as well. I really recommend grabbing one if you can. And I'll get the moderators to drop that website into the comment section as well, just in case you missed that. And don't forget to stay up to date with everything that EGA has to offer. Entheogenesis.org is the place to go. And /connect is where you can find the newsletter, and if you get the newsletter you'll be up to date with everything that's coming. Also there are resources at the EGA website, a ever-growing number of resources for all sorts of ethnobotanical issues, so head along and check those out and you can download those, also beautifully designed. And upcoming will be the release of a new project. If you're familiar with the TripSit chart, which is a chart of drug combinations, it is a community resource that shows interactions between various different substances, whether they're positive or something to avoid. That chart is sort of a good framework and a good way to to talk about this chart that EGA and collaborators are putting together, and it will be available in the coming months. Again, beautifully designed, as everything that EGA does is, and there will be an NFT on sale as well, so that you can be the sole owner of a highly replicatable digital asset. But if that's something that means something to you, that is absolutely something that you can grab your hands on. Tonight, we will be focused on conservation, as I mentioned already, not on identification. So if you do have identification questions, you can, of course, ask them in the comments section of the YouTube chat. We always have such a knowledgeable community, and welcome to all of you from that knowledgeable community. And I'm sure that there might be somebody there that will be able to help you with your question. In fact, that goes for all questions. We will ask those to do with conservation to our presenter later after he has presented. So this episode will be exploring the complexities and the intersection of acacia conservation and DMT consumption through the discussion of the Conseracacian project. There will also be an introduction to strategies for identifying some common Australian acacia, with a focus on Acacia acuminata and Acacia obtusifolia. Look out for those videos, so those will be some of our intermission videos. Conseracacian is a participatory action research project responding to a harm reduction issue minimally addressed within policy, media, research and botanical conservation. The project responds to a threat posed by manufacturers of N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or DMT for short, to a rare species of Australian acacia. The project Conseracacian began in 2018 with a discussion thread on the Corroboree, or the Shaman Australis Botanical Forum, moving to a group private message on the platform and personal communication between key forum participants. The participants struggled to reach consensus on an approach, deliberating with key stakeholders to create a public messaging strategy with a clear aim to reduce demand for DMT produced from wild harvesting of this rare acacia species. That was a mosquito. By encouraging consumers to preference DMT produced from cultivated sources, and that's the crux of the message tonight. Producing a messaging output that met the needs of traditional custodians, the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service, botanical experts and the peer community was complex, as you can imagine. The negotiated output portrays a public message that conservation relies on prohibition of wild source DMT consumption. However, there is a private message among stakeholders that DMT sourced from the wild can be consumed in ways that reduce and even subvert environmental harms. The output also avoids identifying the acacia species in question and encourages cultivation of endangered acacia under license. Strangely, stakeholders also understand that unlicensed cultivation of this endangered acacia may be crucial to its long-term survival. I'd like to introduce our presenter now, Dr. Liam Engel. Liam is a drug science researcher and communicator at the Edith Cowan University's School of Medical and Health Sciences. Liam's passion is in illicit drugs, particularly the areas of harm reduction, psychedelics, ecology, the internet and its role on our culture, and also reform. His unique perspective draws on skills in health and medicine, communications and social sciences, as well as botany and horticulture. And I'd like to pass over to Liam now. Liam, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good. Primarily concerned with, and the people that we consulted with in the construction of this resource. And that's the Wadi people. I think to give context to the whole discussion of what I'm talking about, hopefully someone can drop this in the chat, but you can go to the website conseracacian.com, and the main thing at that website is a PDF, which is a kind of resource that is like a public messaging campaign, basically. And I'm going to be talking about how that came together and what that means and how maybe the message that's there may be a bit more complicated than we're able to portray in that resource, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But to take it to the beginning, this started because there was a discussion on a really popular ethnobotany forum around the wild population of this threatened acacia. And there are kind of a number of threats that are impinging on this species. But one kind of threat that was apparent was that people were wild harvesting this tree for DMT. And this picture is one of these trees that's being cut down and stripped of bark, which is particularly sad, given that you can get a similar kind of DMT yield using fallen phyllodes, and you could potentially go back and collect those phyllodes season after season without having to kill the tree. So this is a sad thing to see, especially when you think about that this particular species, there's only about 3,000 in the wild. So, cutting one down is a big impact, and there was definitely more than one being cut down. Seems to be quite large amounts of it. Anyway, so people on this thread were talking about this issue, trying to think what we can do about the issue, and it culminated in the resource that's at that website. But first, we discussed a variety of kind of things that we could do. Some other ideas besides this messaging campaign we came up with was the idea of, video cameras, like a trail camera to like identify maybe who's doing it, or some kind of signage to show that, or to suggest that there was surveillance, or it's basically a fear tactic. And we didn't actually end up doing any of those strategies, and a big kind of component of that was I think a lot of people weren't keen to interact with police, for one, and reporting, even if someone was, just dealing with that was a whole drama. And the signing issue was kind of like a property issue. Where do we put these signs, and how's that all work? It's like, anyway, not easy. Messaging campaign, easy. So that's what we ended up with. I am going to try to replicate the moment that I had the idea for this, and that was at another EGA, and it's not really going to come off quite the same because we're not in a room, but maybe if people could type in the YouTube chat. But all right, so who amongst you have tried DMT? And this is when everyone goes, yeah. And then it's like, keep your hand. I don't know how this works in a YouTube chat, but, stick with me. Drop your hand if you don't know where that DMT has come from, what kind of tree, or what was the source of that material. And keep your hand up if you do know. And the response is most people put their hands down. And that was kind of a clear moment for me where I was like, oh, well, this is the kind of messaging we can use to deal with this species of concern. And we can do a similar kind of approach to product of designated origin. I don't know if you've heard of, prosciutto. It's like a type of meat that has to be cured in a certain way. And for it to really be prosciutto, it has to come from this place in Italy. Same thing with Stilton cheese. It has to come from a certain place and processes in the UK. And so, the thought was, why don't we try to encourage this consumer preference for a cultivated product? And in doing so, we can try to kind of influence this wild harvesting of a particular species. That was a strategy. So we collabed. We had all these really cool people review the resource and participate in the conversation that are listed here. There are over 30 rounds of feedback. And there are also representatives of traditional owners that kind of cared for the land that some of these plants are on, and as well as some reviews from the National Parks and Wildlife Service and the species coordinator that was looking after these trees in that area. So we had a lot of different stakeholders involved, and really, I think that's good, but also it really complicated the message that we were sending because you can't please everybody. So this is the website I told you to go to. I thought conservation, acacia, Conseracacian, good pun, really sounded more clever than I think it is, because it's kind of confusing. Just to kind of debate or negotiation that had to go in the production of the resource. And maybe kind of one of the strongest examples of this weird balance that's also a really politically difficult conversation, to say it in a way that respects everyone involved. But like I said, so there was like less than 3,000 of this species that existed in the wild. And now there exist over 4,000 that are existing cultivation. And I don't know if a lot is the right word, but a number of these trees are now producing their own seed. And so it means that there's a way of maintaining this species without having to have any impact on the native environment. So that's a really cool and a big deal. And then it's like the issue is that technically all this seed was collected illegally. And I don't think this collection of the seed caused any harm to the population, although now that there are seed that can be produced that aren't from the wild, it means we don't have to take the risk of collecting more seed. Plus, if everyone did it, it would certainly create a large risk. But it's like we did an EGA, another kind of talk on this with talking about like plant thieves or plant keepers. And it's like you come to a plant trying to care for it, or maybe from an ulterior motive, but then along this way or along the journey, you kind of have to do all this additional work that you didn't anticipate, and maybe you reflect negatively on things that you have done, or maybe it was good at the time and now it's not. But, basically it's complicated and we don't know what to do. Another bit of messaging that we didn't include was that there are alternative sources of DNT. It's more politically complex to suggest an alternative source. And this particular source that I've got pictured here, florist grass, I'm not a huge expert in this, but in my understanding, there's also like gramine or some kind of toxic quality in some of them, or at least that's a risk that you need to consider. So it's not so easy as saying like, hey, just use this source, but it's totally a grass that is native and grows everywhere and would be of limited concern to harvest. So there is like more discussion to be had if we're trying to encourage alternative sourcing or consumption preferences. And classic harm reduction nuance is we couldn't talk about manufacture. And this is like a kind of a lame visual pun I've done where I've replaced, the idea of manufacture with being an ornament. It's all for ornamental reasons. We can't talk about or encourage any kind of manufacture behaviour just because of the politics that surround prohibition and different people getting in trouble. And I think this speaks to a neglect of harm reduction, whereby why don't we reduce the harm that pertains to manufacturers? Why are they somehow deserving of harm in a way that consumers aren't? And I think this plays into how Australian drug policy works, where harm is separated from supply and demand reduction. Does harm only exist for consumers? I don't think so. And this is another quote from that same study I did of blue light. And this is talking about how there were these conflicting perspectives for national parks and wildlife services versus the entheobotanical community. And it was kind of like an argument over harm reduction around Suboxone, where someone says, don't smoke Suboxone, it's not good for you. And the other person says, oh, well, maybe if you're going to inject this stuff in an unclean environment, maybe smoking Suboxone would actually be a more healthy choice. And in the Acacia example is like National Parks and Wildlife Service said, don't wild harvest Acacia. And we're like, well, people are doing it anyway. How do we mitigate this risk? And so we try to give some information to discourage people from doing it in a way that's really going to do more severe damage. Complicated. Another weird, complicated thing in this, because I didn't actually realize until going through all of this that the people that had done this amazing conservation work, growing and learning how to grow and spreading these plants around, were actually doing so illegally, because it was like, it seems so like a small deal to collect a seed that probably wasn't going to germinate anywhere and grow it and share it. But that is illegal. And the Anyway, so you can get, if you have one of these plants and they're flowering and they're producing seed, please contact me, because you can get a license and you could become the first licensed grower of this plant in the country. I've spoken to a few people. No one seems interested. I'm not really sure unless you're going to grow on a huge scale, what the benefits are. But I'm interested in this bureaucracy, and I think it would be cool just to have this documented legal plan for people to have access to, should the world explode or whatever. Anyway, it's also strange. And this is another kind of example of the language that the National Parks and Wildlife Service kind of wanted, or the more hard line they have to take because of where they're positioned. And they said that we needed to say this: landowner consent must be obtained first and a license may be necessary. And then in red in between was some of our community feedback. And we kind of switched to, rather than prescribing what to do, we just explained the consequences of what might happen. So rather than saying you have to get a license, when we said it is illegal without a license, So I mean, it's a small nuance, but I think particularly when a lot of people within these communities are already stigmatized and criminalized and can react in a way that feels like they're being judged very easily, I think this language is important. Another cool thing that we couldn't go into the pamphlet really, but acacia extracts, when smoked, despite people talking about the primary constituent as DMT, seem to have a longer duration than synthesized or purified DMT when smoked. What does that mean? I don't know. It's cool. We should definitely do more research on psychedelic acacia. Some more stuff we didn't really talk about, and that I actually learned in some more detail doing this. And it's a nuance that I think we get into maybe a little bit on this new EGA combo matrix chart we're about to release, that we talked about earlier, that is based on this tripsit chart. But it's about how MAOIs, which are the primary kind of secondary component of what might could be called anahuasca or ayahuasca. But there are different kind of ways or different types of MAOIs, and depending on the type of MAOI you use, it kind of affects the degree of risk of the drug taking, particularly when you're combining it with other things. And so I've listed there the different types of MAOI, which are A, B, reversible, and selective, and there's also the opposite of those, so like non-selective and irreversible. But rather than to explain in detail of how this complicated reaction works that I barely understand, the takeaway is that ayahuasca and MDMA is a potentially hazardous combination. Kava and amphetamine is a potentially hazardous combination. And you can see there that Aya is MAOI-A and Kava is MAOI-B. But let's not go too deep into that. I've already given myself a headache. This is a picture of ayahuasca, and I did when I kind of prefaced talking about ayahuasca. I didn't even mention it, but Changa, ayahuasca, same kind of ayahuasca effect. But the point I'm getting at, or want to talk about, is even saying ayahuasca and just labeling it on these different drug combinations is complicated. It's good to communicate the effect I'm talking about, but ayahuasca is typically just a term given to the vine that is not the DMT containing component of the ayahuasca mix, and it also has like a cultural origin. So I'm just calling things ayahuasca like that, particularly when already so much of psychedelic culture is kind of appropriated and politically contentious. It's another thing that we didn't get time to flag in the resource, but is kind of a nuance that is deserving of further attention. I do wonder how this kind of messaging might apply to other plants, this preference for, cultivated sources. We applied it in the production of our peyote conservation resource, which you can check out. But that is also another kind of politically complicated or contentious issue, because that plays into traditional and First Nations communities. So that's hard. Another thing that is also hard, and I wonder about, what's the messaging for plants that aren't threatened, that are psychoactive, or even ones that are weedy, and how do we learn to harvest them in sustainable and ways that are, conservationists? I don't have an answer for you, but I think it's very interesting. San Pedro is a cool cactus that I like a lot, and it's kind of weedy. So can we harvest that ethically? What does that look like? I'm just back to my old rabbit hole whereby I need to have a conversation with these plants directly, and that's easier said than done. Final point. Hard to do an evaluation of how effective this was, but since producing this resource, I have seen DMT on the darknet that is marketed as being sustainably farmed. And it not only says sustainably farmed, it says the acacia species that I'm concerned about. So messaging is getting through. Whether or not it's just marketing and they're really doing this is another question, but it seems promising. So I'm happy to see that. Thanks.
Hi everyone, welcome. Let's explore the identification of two acacia species, Acacia acuminata and Acacia obtusifolia. Acacias belong to a large family of plants called the Fabaceae, which contains over 740 genera and over 19,000 plants in Fabaceae, which includes herbs, shrubs, and trees, are also known as legumes, which describes a fruit inside of a pod. Many Fabaceae, including Acacia, are known to have a symbiotic association with nitrogen-fixing soil bacteria. Prominent Fabaceae that you likely already know include the pea plant, the peanut plant, carob, and soybean, just to name a few. There are over 1,300 species of acacia worldwide, with the majority found naturally occurring across Australia. They play a prominent role in the country's botanical identity as the largest genus of flowering plants and as the national floral emblem, Acacia pycnantha. While bipinnate leaflets are considered acacia's true leaves, many Australian acacias have evolved to utilize flattened out stems, known as phyllodes, to perform the function of a leaf. With most of these species losing their true leaves in the early stages of development. Acacia acuminata is a shrub or tree, often multi-stemmed, that grows between 2 and 10 meters tall, usually in an obconic form, which is that of an upside-down cone shape. The botanical name is derived from the acuminate apex of the phyllodes, whilst the common name, raspberry jam wattle, refers to the strong scent of raspberry jam produced from freshly cut timber. Widely distributed throughout southwest Australia, Acacia acuminata can be found within semi-arid woodlands, shrublands, on clay soils, red sands, often near streams and granite outcrops. This species consists of 3 variants, the typical, narrow phyllodes, and the small seed. The typical variant, as pictured, has narrowly elliptic phyllodes between 8 and 15 centimeters in length, the margins of which are lined with tiny hairs. Numerous fine veins run along the phyllodes, mostly in parallel, with some interconnecting, with the mid-nerve slightly more prominent. Spicate inflorescences, or spike-shaped clusters of flowers, emerge from the phyllodes axil, featuring many tiny golden, yellow, formorous flowers, meaning each flower contains 4 sepals and petals. Pollinated flowers produce flat brown pods or legumes, between 3 and 8 centimeters in length, and containing elliptic to ovate black-brown seeds, 2 to 4 millimeters in length. Acacia obtusifolia is an upright or spreading shrub or tree that grows between 1 and 15 metres in height, occurring in woodlands and granite ranges from eastern Victoria through eastern New South Wales and into southeastern Queensland. The botanic name is derived from the obtuse angle of the phylloid apex, which is between 90 and 180 degrees. The common name bluntleaf wattle refers to the broken or blunt tip often found on phyllodes. The phyllodes of Acacia obtusifolia are generally narrowly elliptic, between 12 and 25 centimeters in length, dark green and leathery. The phyllodes commonly contain 2 to 5 primary veins, with anastomizing or interconnecting secondary veins. And while closely related to Acacia longifolia and sharing some similarities, obtusifolia can easily be distinguished by the red resinous phylloid margins. Spicate inflorescences of pale yellow formorous flowers are separated from the phylloid axil by a 5 to 10 millimeter peduncle. Flat brown pods with a slight curve between 5 and 15 centimeters long produce narrowly elliptical black-brown seeds 4 to 6 millimeters in length. And that concludes this short presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and all the best. See ya.
And that was our short video on acacias, and thank you very much to Liam for that presentation. We have Q&A now, so if you do have any questions, please do drop them in to the chat section of the YouTube video tonight, and we will get to as many questions as possible. First up, our first question: how reliable are the online seed sellers? Lee would like to plant one in their backyard, and I'm sure many other people would too. Liam?
I guess it depends which seller you're using. Quick plug for the Shaman Australis Botanicals Nursery, and also for Herbalistics. I know they're both pretty good vendors. I think some other kind of places like eBay, you might have a bit more kind of risk, but I think it's hard to say, especially because for most plants, normally the best, coolest seeds come direct from the growers, and often these growers aren't, commercial vendors. So I think going from someone who can, advocate for a particular seller is the way to go. I think that's my best recommendation, to find someone that, people say, hey, this person's got good seeds, I trust them. It's a kind of a boring answer, but I think that's the only way to do it.
Is it something that people can find at your average nursery and places like that as well?
Sure. It depends what you're interested in getting. I think these ones that we just talked about in the identification video, the Acacia acuminata and the Acacia obtusifolia, those are both incredibly common acacia, which is why we were doing the ID videos, right? Because we wouldn't want to give an ID, even though, because those videos are obviously not about encouraging people to go wild harvest. I've said probably too many times already that we're not about that. But it's less risky to talk about ID for those, because if people did, it wouldn't have quite the same impact on the population as it would for other species. So for those two, obtusifolia and acuminata, I reckon it will be very easy to get seeds because they're so prolific. It will be strange for people to be mislabeling or selling seeds for those plants.
And how can we best help threatened acacia, which I know you touched on a little bit tonight, but some more tips and hints for our audience tonight?
Well, I think the easiest thing is just to actually read through that pamphlet and encouraging other people to do it too. Then, if you are a consumer of DMT, to preference products that have been made from a cultivated source. And you can also obviously grow acacia yourself and kind of become more informed and just be interested. I think the more people pay attention, the more, the plants get cared for.
Our next question: can acuminata be grown on the east coast of Australia? And that's from Spirit Level Studios. Thank you. Keep those questions coming.
certainly can.
Oh, that was an easy one. Okay, how about, I know you touched on a discussion that happened with a wide range of views. What were some of the conflicting values? Can you share with us some of the conflicting values that came up in that discussion around acacia conservation?
Well, the strongest example in my mind is just around this kind of strong line on legal issues that National Parks and Wildlife Service would take and would have to take, because I imagine operating as an employee, if you were to not toe that line, then you would risk losing your job. So completely understandable why they have to do that. But then you're talking to representatives of the psychedelic community, a lot of people of whom are criminalized and, like I said, might actually be growing these plants illegally despite offering significant benefit to the community. I think that's the kind of conflict, because those people they're used to not having to, or not like this, that they're always criminalized. They've lived their life being stigmatized and repressed by the law. So they're not really keen to start saying, hey, like you better follow the rules, because really that's not what it's about. Like, following the rules doesn't even always mean that plants get cared for or people get cared for. So I think that's kind of a complicating issue, primarily around prohibition, and then whether or not people agree or disagree is often beside the point. It's the institution or the hat that they're wearing in a particular role that forces them to take a hardline position. And when you're dealing with representatives of communities of people who use drugs or the psychedelic community, they're not really going to take well to experiencing the same stigma they experience every day. If you're asking them for their legitimate opinion, they're like, no, destroy prohibition. But
Sure.
How do you reconcile that with someone whose career kind of rests on obeying the law?
This is not so much a conservation question, but maybe just a quick one, because it's specific. But somebody trying to grow acuminata near Newcastle and finding that the weather is extremely difficult and the growing is slow, given they don't like much water, would it be okay in the ground with the coastal rainfall?
I think I would want to control the water. I'm not super experienced with acuminata, but I just know what the weather's like in Perth, and they obviously going to have less rainfall than you're experiencing there. I think there is a really good, it's not an EGA resource, but I think there's a video. It's by the same Acacia genius that produced the last video, but he's done, it's kind of like a germination and a soil prep. My hot tip would be to combine that with the EGA bottle tech, and I reckon that is going to be killer for getting your kind of acacia up to a bigger size. And then once it is to a bigger size, maybe it could hack being in the soil. But you probably want to get at least 50 centimeters or something on it. And it's going to be might be a roll of the dice. I don't know, maybe someone in the chat has grown acuminata in Newcastle, but I'd just be cautious.
Yeah, there's some lively questions going on in the chat, and make sure to ask those questions in the chat, because if we don't get to them, somebody in our very knowledgeable community will. Just wanted to quickly mention, as Liam referred to some of the other videos, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. There are a whole plethora of videos up there, including 3 new ones this week. One on some entheogenic conservation. That Coke bottle tech that Liam referred to is there as well, and you'll find a whole plethora of other videos from previous webcasts and from previous events as well. Our next question, where does EGA stand on law reform such as decriminalisation? And before you jump into the answer there, I know that this week in the news, Fiona Patten from the Reason Party has been talking about her bill to decriminalise drugs. I haven't read the bill yet, but I understand that the decriminalisation would essentially mean that there is an introduction of a diversion program. So rather than receiving a criminal penalty, people would be required to complete a education program, basically telling you not to do drugs. These things are often still abstinence-based, unfortunately, and we know for the vast majority of people who use drugs of any kind, it is not a problem for them. But yeah, we're working in a difficult system in Victoria, So can you touch on EGA's position, Liam?
Oh, well, as I understand it, EGA are pro decrim, which is very cool. And I kind of see as a fundamental baseline for any kind of organization that works with people who use drugs. On a personal level, I'm kind of interested in some more
You seem to have frozen, Liam.
experimentalized in the first place. Oh no, am I back?
Yeah, sorry, you just turned a little bit robotic for a moment there. So if you want to rewind a little bit, and you were talking about EGA supporting decriminalisation.
Yeah, EGA are pro decrim.
Oh dear. Perhaps while we wait for Liam's internet to reconnect, I do have another video that I'll screen for you now. Please do keep those questions coming. We will continue Q&A in just a moment. Once those, once the birds of prey stop targeting our very important pigeons that deliver Australia's slow internet, we'll be back in just a moment.
Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well. I wanted to share with you a short propagation guide I put together last year. Now, this guide summarizes the propagation techniques I've used and refined over the years. It's a live electronic document that I'll continually update with different bits and pieces. I'm not sure where it will be hosted permanently, but I'm sure at the end of this little talk, a link to its current whereabouts could be posted. So I developed this easy-to-use guide that beginners could refer to and build upon as they develop and refine their own propagation techniques and style. And I think it's a really good idea to share your results with the wider plant community so that we can all learn together. And growing trees, of course, begins with the seed. So the best time to germinate acacia seeds is in early spring as it starts to warm up, plenty of rainfall and soft sunlight. And coincidentally, this is the first day of spring here in Australia, September 1st, is also our National Wattle Day. So each year I always make a point of germinating seeds on this day. Now place your seeds in a mug or similar. I like to use this little glass measuring jug and pour in boiling hot water, covering the seeds by a few centimeters. And here we're replicating a bushfire scenario where the short-lived intense heat triggers the dormant seeds in the soil to wake up. You may notice some seeds float to the surface, and this usually indicates that the seeds have not developed properly or have been damaged and are likely not viable. I usually just keep them there on the chance that they may be viable, however you can choose to remove them. At this stage I like to inoculate the seeds once the water has cooled down, and I do this by adding a small amount of soil collected from around the roots of a healthy wild acacia. Ideally of the species you're actually trying to cultivate, but if you don't have access to that, just collect some soil from acacias in your area. And this introduces a symbiotic soil bacteria called rhizobia, which fixes nitrogen to the tree, helping it grow more vigorously. So we stir in the inoculation soil into the seed soup and allow it to soak for 24 to 48 hours. Then simply strain the seeds with a little kitchen strainer or whatever you have on hand. So at this stage you'll notice that the seeds have swollen, having absorbed some of the water and hopefully some bacteria too. The seeds are quite sticky here, so I like to place them on a paper towel for an hour or so just to dry out slightly, and this makes them much easier to handle. To prepare the germination media, I mix together 50% cocoa coir, 30% perlite, 10% granitic sand, and 10% small river stone. I don't use exact measurements, I just sort of eyeball it. So I mix all those ingredients together But if you don't have access to any of those ingredients, really just don't worry about it and continue with whatever you can. So we need to choose a germination tray. The small one on the left is suitable for about 10 to 20 seeds, and the larger one can suit 100 plus seeds. So fill up your germination tray with the media, leaving a centimetre gap from the top of the tray. A nifty little trick is to place another tray on top of the media and gently push down, creating a nice flat surface. Place the seeds down flat on the surface of the media, with ideally a 1 centimetre gap between each seed. At this stage, I like to sprinkle some more inoculation soil on top too. Cover the seeds with some more germination media, filling the tray up to the top, and sprinkle a small layer of river stone on top. And the reason for doing this is it helps to anchor the seedlings down in the loose media we've created, as their taproot is so strong that upon germination they can often push themselves out of the media, exposing their roots to sunlight, which will lead to their downfall. So just adding a little bit of weight on top helps to sort of anchor them down. And again, I like to sprinkle some more inoculation soil just to be sure. So set your tray on a heat mat or a heated propagation table. I like to set the temperature to about 23 degrees in an area of good airflow. Alternatively, if you don't have anything like that, just set it in a warm place with good light and water daily. After 2 to 4 weeks, you'll start to see the seeds germinating. Don't touch them straight away, just give them a week or two more to establish. Once the seedlings are 1 to 2 centimeters tall, gently pluck them out using a dipstick, which is like a small pencil, skewer or chopstick, angled down to the bottom of the tray next to the seedling. And with your other hand gently holding the seedling, jiggle it and pry it up from the bottom, from underneath, with the dipstick. And the loose media we created allows for the seedlings to come free easily without damaging the delicate and important taproot. It's a good idea to pot only a few up at a time, as they can dry out really quickly if left exposed, even for a few minutes on a hot day. I like to set 5 to 10 at a time on a little plate covered with a moist paper towel whilst potting up. So prepare your potting mix by combining 70% native potting mix, 10% perlite, 10% granitic sand, and 10% 3mm riverstone. And again, these are just rough measurements. As well as a little bit of inoculation soil again, and some native slow release fertilizer. A lot of people have trouble finding granitic sand. I just get it from a building supply place locally. If you can't get it, just don't worry about it. So we'll mix those ingredients together. So back to the seedlings. So once they're plucked out, here you can see a distinct change between the stem and where the root begins. And when potting up, you want to line the top of the soil with the beginning of the stem. And in potting into a native tree tube, it's a good idea to first fill a couple of centimeters at the bottom of the tube with your potting mix and just lightly compress it down. Hold the seedling and gently fill in around it, aiming for the beginning of the stem to be about half a centimeter or so below the top of the tube. And this actually creates a reservoir to capture more water during irrigation. So press in the corners of the tube, and that fills any underlying air pockets, and then top it up with some more potting mix, and then water in with a seaweed solution such as sea salt. Water the seedlings daily and occasionally with sea salt. The small soil volume of the tubes only holds a limited amount of soil nutrient, So it's important to top dress or sprinkle some slow release fertilizer on top every few months. So there you have it. In 4 to 6 months, you should have a nice tree ready to plant out. And here's a photo of one of these trees in the wild. Absolutely beautiful. They can actually grow a lot bigger in cultivation when they're not competing for resources. And you can grow them in pots, like bigger pots. But after a few years, you'll notice that they become unhappy. And ultimately, they want to be in the ground so that they can reach their potential. And that concludes this brief walkthrough of the guide. I hope you found it useful. Thank you all very much for listening, and until next time, wish you all the best. Bye.
And thank you for sticking with us and enjoying that video on some cultivation tips for you. We are continuing our Q&A with Dr. Liam Engel, who was our presenter tonight for our episode on Conseracacian. And the website that you want to find is just down the bottom there, conseracacian.com, for the resource as well. Thank you to everyone who has asked their questions so far. And just want to quickly mention that Mark in the YouTube comments section mentioned that in some national parks there are already trail cameras implemented to protect species which are endangered. So thank you, Mark, for that comment as well. Our next question comes from Mark. Can you please elaborate on the concept of a license to grow acacia? When do people require one? Where do people get one? Etc.
Right, well, so it's kind of basically it's a form you got to fill out. It's like a 2-page form. I'd have to look up to tell you exactly what is the title of this form and even where I have to send it. But I got it through the National Parks and Wildlife Service. But besides just kind of listing, where your garden is, how much you're growing, et cetera, the key piece of information that we would need to input into this would be to show that the plant material that you're cultivating has come from a legal source. And I'm not exactly sure how this goes because, like I said, any wild source plant material is going to be done so illegally unless they've kind of got a permit in advance, which no one has done. So it's in a weird position, but as far as I understand it, if we were able to get seed from a cultivated tree and say that we were growing acacia from this acacia species of concern via that means, the National Parks and Wildlife Service team have kind of implied that we should be able to get that licensing through. And I think it is in everyone's best interests to have a kind of tracked, institutionally certified source, just because, if the world explodes, the one that's documented is going to be the one we know for sure that this is the right one. It hasn't accidentally crossbred with another species. So I think that's the value of it. But like I was saying, we're a community of people that are stigmatized and criminalized. And what's the incentive to deal with the bureaucracy to be able to legally do something you might already been doing?
Yeah. Our next question from Nathan. Can you explain more around taking leaves as opposed, that it should be opposed to taking bark? And that also complements another question that we had from Lee, asking about how long somebody should wait before retrieving bark from a plant.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, technically, which I think was in the video before, to just be a mad nerd for a moment, they're phyllodes, not leaves, and they can just be collected from the ground, and in a lot of cases have a similar yield to the DMT from bark. And for that reason, in response to the second question, I think they're typically a better fallen phyllodes or fallen twigs or just fallen plant material are a better choice of source material for DMT because it saves you having to damage or cut the tree. Every time any plant you do a cut for whatever reason, you're harvesting material, you're doing grafting, whatever, you're creating a potential site for infection. Just like when you get a cut on your skin, it's you keep it clean and whatever, and you'll probably be fine, but you are creating a risk. And that risk kind of increases when you're just leaving stuff outside, and especially when you're dealing with a kind of rare species. So for that reason, I think it's better to avoid bark. And just, I don't know, the more I grow plants, the more I'm like obsessing over the harm. Like, I don't want to cut any of my plants unless like I'm doing it to make them grow faster. And so for that reason, I just rather use fallen material. And did I answer the first question? I went on a rant. We talked about fire loads, but what was the question?
No, I think you did. The question was around how to collect, where to collect, when to collect, and I think that was all answered in there. Unless there was anything else you wanted to add, if you haven't frozen. You look very still. Just thank you to everybody who has asked questions tonight, and thank you as well to everybody who has answered some questions tonight in our questions section, in the comment section of our YouTube video. Make sure, if you haven't already, to hit subscribe to our YouTube, and that will help us to reach the hallmark of 8,000 on our way to 10,000. I do have one final question, but before we go to that, just wanted to mention again that the end of year in-person conference, you can now register for that event. Head to the EGA website, click here to register, and it'll take you through to this registration form, and then you can fill in your details there, and you will receive information about it. You are now unfrozen. Thank you, Liam. Our final question: is there a particular benefit to collecting and growing from seed as compared to buying seedlings and just having one or two nice big trees in time? From MDC.
Well, I think it's a question of how much space you're having, but you realize you're asking like an obsessed gardener the benefits of growing from seed to buying a couple of trees. You get heaps more, it's heaps cheaper, it's heaps more satisfying. Grow stuff from seed. Oh my God, just do it.
Oops, I just realized I left me on in that. Yes, okay, do that. And
sorry, but it's more fun and it's rewarding. Seriously, grow from seed. Just do it. It's easy. Come on, you can do it.
Yep, it is more fun. I've got chickens in my yard, and we've got sort of a sectioned off yard. We've got half the back, huge backyard for them to explore and enjoy the backyard. Lots of places to dust bathe, lots of places to pick and scratch. And what do? They come out the front and they try and dig up our nice garden that we have been cultivating, and we've just got some like cucumbers and pumpkins down, and I found one of them with that blank stupid chicken look in its face having a dust bath in where there was previously a plant. She dug it up and just got that out of the way so that she could have a nice dust bath. Thank you, chicken. So sometimes you gotta watch out for pests, even if they are your own pests as well. Any final comments that you wanted to make, Liam?
Oh, well, that's why I don't have chickens anymore, dude.
They are trouble, yeah. It really is quite frustrating. Yeah, very frustrating. Well, Liam, thank you very much for tonight's talk, and thank you for helping to put together the Conseracacian resource and all of the work that you do, which is a huge amount of work, I know.
Oh, thank you. Go plants.
And thank you very much for joining us tonight on the 12th edition of our EGA Microdose Webcast. Make sure again to subscribe to EGA. You can do that at entheogenesis.org/connect, where you can subscribe to the newsletter and receive regular updates. And also, I just want to mention again the IsWas t-shirt, which you can find now if we head on the IsWas website, iswas.com.au. You click the bit that says EGA, and that'll bring up the EGA t-shirt, and that's what it looks like. And it's in all sorts of sizes, just this color, this nice green color. And there's two versions, the male and the female. I don't know what there are differences, because I know when I've worn a t-shirt that's meant for a female before, it's in the wrong places, but I'm not a clothes person, so I don't understand why that is. But all the profits for that go towards EGA and help to continue the work that we're doing. Thank you to everyone as well who made a donation to help tonight's webcast happen, and to all of EGA's projects. If you ever are able to make a donation, or if there's somebody that you know that might be interested in the work that EGA does, make sure to send our information on to them. Tell them to subscribe to our YouTube channel and the various different social media platforms that are available. We share ethnobotanical and psychedelic information regularly, and you can find out all about that. And make sure to stay tuned as well for our next month's webcast, which will be announced in the coming weeks, and you'll find out about, and that's the easiest way to do that, is just stay connected with EGA. Thank you very much for tuning in tonight, and I'm going to play our final video once more for those that missed it, but if you want to tune out tonight, thanks for joining us. Enjoy your evening.
Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well. I wanted to share with you a short propagation guide I put together last year. And this guide summarizes the Hi everyone, welcome. Let's explore the identification of two acacia species, Acacia acuminata and Acacia obtusifolia. Acacias belong to a large family of plants called the Fabaceae, which contains over 740 genera and over 19,000 species. Plants in Fabaceae, which includes herbs, shrubs, and trees, are also known as legumes, which describes a fruit inside of a pod. Many Fabaceae, including Acacia, are known to have a symbiotic association with nitrogen-fixing soil bacteria. Prominent Fabaceae that you likely already know include the pea plant, the peanut plant, carob, and soybean, just to name a few. There are over 1,300 species of acacia worldwide, with the majority found naturally occurring across Australia. They play a prominent role in the country's botanical identity as the largest genus of flowering plants and as the national floral emblem, Acacia pycnantha. While bipinnate leaflets are considered acacia's true leaves, many Australian acacias have evolved to utilize flattened out stems, known as phyllodes, to perform the function of a leaf. Most of these species losing their true leaves in the early stages of development. Acacia acuminata is a shrub or tree, often multi-stemmed, that grows between 2 and 10 meters tall, usually in an obconic form, which is that of an upside-down cone shape. The botanical name is derived from the acuminate apex of the phylode, whilst the common name, raspberry jam wattle, refers to the strong scent of raspberry jam produced from freshly cut timber. Widely distributed throughout southwest Australia, Acacia acuminata can be found within semi-arid woodlands, shrublands, on clay soils, red sands, often near streams and granite outcrops. This species consists of 3 variants, the typical, narrow phylode, and the small seed. The typical variant, as pictured, has narrowly elliptic phyllodes between 8 and 15 centimeters in length, the margins of which are lined with tiny hairs. Numerous fine veins run along the phylode, mostly in parallel, with some interconnecting, with the mid-nerve slightly more prominent. Spicate inflorescences, or spike-shaped clusters of flowers, emerge from the phylode axil, featuring many tiny golden, yellow, formorous flowers, meaning each flower contains 4 sepals and petals. Pollinated flowers produce flat brown pods or legumes, between 3 and 8 centimeters in length, and containing elliptic to ovate black-brown seeds, 2 to 4 millimeters in length. Acacia obtusifolia is an upright or spreading shrub or tree that grows between 1 and 15 meters in height, occurring in woodlands and granite ranges from eastern Victoria through eastern New South Wales and into southeastern Queensland. The botanic name is derived from the obtuse angle of the phyllode apex, which is between 90 and 180 degrees. The common name bluntleaf wattle refers to the broken or blunt tip often found on phyllodes. The phyllodes of Acacia obtusifolia are generally narrowly elliptic, between 12 and 25 centimeters in length, dark green and leathery. The phyllodes commonly contain 2 to 5 primary veins, with anastomizing or interconnecting secondary veins. And while closely related to Acacia longifolia and sharing some similarities, obtusifolia can easily be distinguished by the red resinous phylloid margins. Spicate inflorescences of pale yellow formorous flowers are separated from the phylloid axil by a 5 to 10 millimeter peduncle. Flat brown pods with a slight curve between 5 and 15 centimeters long produce narrowly elliptical black-brown seeds 4 to 6 millimeters in length. And that concludes this short presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and all the best. See ya.